It was supposed to be an ordinary morning for the air traffic controllers at Caracas International Airport in Venezuela. The skies were clear, the routine flights had all arrived or departed, and nothing seemed out of place. That was until a strange blip appeared on their radar. A large aircraft was approaching slowly, steadily but without prior clearance. The controller leaned in, puzzled. The plane didn't match any of the day's scheduled arrivals. It wasn't broadcasting any identification, no transponder code, no flight plan. It was just there. Then came the call. A male voice crackled over the radio, shaky and confused. This is Pan Am Flight 914, requesting permission to land. Repeat, this is Pan Am 914 from New York to Miami, requesting immediate clearance. The controller froze. He stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. Pan Am? That airline didn't exist anymore. It had shut down years ago. And Pan Am 914? That flight had disappeared decades earlier. At first, they thought it had to be a prank, some amateur radio operator playing tricks. But as the aircraft came into view through the observation window, a chill ran down their spines. It wasn't just the name. It was the plane, an old Douglas DC-4, a model long retired from commercial aviation, faded blue and white paint, the Pan Am logo barely visible under the grime of time. The engines looked worn, outdated. It was as if the plane had stepped out of a time capsule. Without waiting for full clearance, the plane landed. Ground staff scrambled to meet it, unsure whether to treat this as a threat or an emergency. As they approached, they noticed something else. The faces at the windows, passengers, dozens of them, peering out with wide eyes, dressed in mid-century clothes. Some women wore hats and gloves, men in suits with narrow ties, children clutching small bags and toys that hadn't been made in years. The flight crew opened the door manually. The pilot emerged first, shielding his eyes from the sun, blinking in disbelief. His uniform was unmistakably vintage. He looked just as confused as the people watching him. "Where are we?" he asked. "You're in Caracas, Venezuela," one of the officers replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's impossible," the pilot muttered. "We were just over the Atlantic. We should have landed in Miami 3 hours ago." He trailed off as he looked around. The airport, the equipment, the vehicles, none of it looked familiar. His eyes scanned the tarmac, and it finally sank in. This wasn't his time anymore. The pilot reached into his jacket and handed the officer a flight manifest. It was dated July 2, 1955. Authorities quickly took control of the scene. Medical teams were brought in. No one was injured, but every single person on that flight seemed misplaced. Not just in geography, but in time. Some passengers asked about Eisenhower. Others asked if the Yankees were still winning. One man wanted to call a hotel that hadn't existed in decades. A woman asked if she could send a telegram. Officials struggled to make sense of it. The passengers showed no signs of aging out of sync. They hadn't been asleep or frozen. For them, the flight had been completely normal, a few hours of flying turbulence over the ocean, and then an unexpected diversion. No one had any idea that 35 years had passed. The flight logs in the cockpit hadn't recorded anything out of the ordinary. The clocks in the plane matched the time they'd taken off from New York in 1955. The food trays were still full. The coffee in the galley was still warm. The world had changed, but for them, only a few hours had gone by. News of the event didn't take long to spread. Within days, the airport was swarmed by journalists, scientists, and government agents. Everyone wanted answers. But just when they thought the mystery couldn't get any, stranger something happened that no one could explain. Authorities decided to quarantine the plane and everyone on board. They were moved to a secure facility outside the city while officials tried to understand what they were dealing with. Most of the passengers were cooperative, although confused. They asked repeatedly when they would be allowed to call their families that, for all they knew, hadn't seen them in decades or had long since given up hope. Meanwhile, investigators worked around the clock to authenticate the identities. They combed through old archives, birth certificates, and photos. What they found was both incredible and deeply unsettling. Every passenger on the manifest had been declared legally dead. Some had surviving relatives, most of whom were now elderly. Some had even died themselves. One woman's husband had remarried and had grandchildren. When she was told the truth, she sat in stunned silence for almost an hour. Then she asked for a mirror. "I need to see if I still look like me," she whispered. It wasn't just the people that puzzled the authorities, it was the aircraft itself. Experts from aviation agencies examined it inch by inch. Everything matched the technology of the 1950s. No black box, no GPS, no modern systems. Even the fuel it used was outdated by decades. But somehow it had flown undetected into one of the most heavily monitored airspaces in the modern world. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the plane disappeared. It was parked in a secure hangar under 24/7 surveillance. Cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards were posted all around. But one morning, without warning, it was gone. No alarms, no trace, just an empty space on the tarmac and silence on the cameras. All recordings of that night were corrupted. The timestamp on the footage flickered for hours, showing dates that jumped from 1955 to 1992 and back again. Some clips didn't play at all. Others were pure static. The disappearance only deepened the mystery. How does a 40,000-pound aircraft vanish without a sound? And why? Some believe the plane was never supposed to land in the first place, that something beyond our understanding had momentarily let it slip through a crack in time. Others claimed it was all a hoax, a fabrication meant to distract or manipulate public curiosity. But the people were real. Journalists who interviewed a few of the passengers said they seemed deeply human, scared, hopeful, and full of questions. One child asked if he could still go to school in America. Another asked why cars were so quiet and flat. A woman cried when she saw a flat-screen TV and whispered, "This must be the future." The Venezuelan government, under international pressure, released a vague statement denying any supernatural claims. They insisted the plane was part of an unauthorized flight simulation and that no time travel or mysterious disappearance had occurred. But no one bought that explanation. Too many witnesses, too many details that didn't add up. Even years later, strange rumors persisted. Some say they saw passengers from the flight living under new identities in Europe. Others believe the plane reappeared briefly again in 2019 over the Atlantic, only to vanish before reaching land. But perhaps the most chilling rumor of all came from a customs officer who worked that day. He said that when he asked the pilot what year he thought it was, the man stared at him and said, "It's still 1955, isn't it?" Then he smiled. But the officer swears it wasn't a smile of confusion or relief. It was a smile of knowing. And to this day, the story of Pan Am Flight 914 lives on not just as an internet myth, but as one of the most unsettling modern legends that continues to haunt the skies.